Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take a look at complex, often overlooked infrastructure, and we show you exactly why it matters to your financial life. Today, we're diving into a cost of government shutdowns that it rarely makes the headlines, but it impacts every single investment decision made in this country. We're talking about the huge consequences when the flow of crucial U.S. economic data just stops.
It's a crisis of information, of integrity, really. And it creates this terrifying ripple effect through the entire financial system. When the government pauses its work because of political deadlock, the essential plumbing of the economy, it suffers an immediate and often invisible blow. And we aren't talking about small administrative delays here. We're talking about the big ones, the foundational reports, specifically the GDP estimate, the consumer price index, the CPI, and the monthly jobs data, all of it getting delayed or distorted or just disappearing right when it's needed most.
Exactly. And when those lifelines, these fundamental facts about the economy, when they go dark, it creates this deep data vacuum. And this isn't just an inconvenience for a handful of people inside the Federal Reserve.
And not at all. Far from it. When these reports are delayed, critical decision makers across the board, from the Fed setting monetary policy to portfolio managers shifting billions, right down to small business owners trying to make hiring plans, they're all left effectively flying blind. So our mission today is to get past the political theater of it all and uncover the specific, measurable cost of that data vacuum. We need to understand why safeguarding the facts is, in itself, essential financial infrastructure.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think the best place to start is with the biggest consumer of this data, the Federal Reserve. We hear it all the time, the Fed is data dependent. So what are the practical real-world implications when those cornerstone reports just don't show up? What does that actually do to the engine room of monetary policy?
The immediate impact on the Fed is systemic. It's huge. Remember, the Fed operates under a dual mandate, maximum employment and price stability. So, stable inflation. To hit both of those goals, they need high-resolution current images of the economy. They need to know now, they need to know with precision where inflation is heading and if the labor market is overheating or, cooling down.
So those three reports, jobs, GDP, and CPI, they're like their GPS coordinates. And if that GPS is offline, the pilot is just relying on old maps.
That's the danger, exactly. If the picture they're seeing is even just a few weeks stale, it fundamentally increases the risk of what we call a policy mistake. Let's take a specific scenario. The FOMC is meeting. They have to decide whether to raise or hold interest rates. If the latest inflation data, the CPI, is just missing because the Bureau of Labor Statistics was shut down, they're cornered.
They can't do their job. They're forced to rely on models or, data from the last quarter, which in this kind of economic environment might as well be ancient history.
Precisely. They just lack that absolute certainty they need to make those fine-tuned adjustments. Historically, the greatest policy errors come from reacting to yesterday's news. If they use stale data and they see an inflation threat that has actually, already started to cool off, they might hike rates too aggressively. And that's the mistake that can trigger a recession and cause mass layoffs. Suddenly, they're failing the employment half of their mandate.
Okay, but what about the other way around? What if the data they're missing would have showed a huge surge in inflation, like a massive, unexpected jump in housing costs that isn't in the old numbers?
Then they risk the opposite, an equally damaging mistake. They might pause or even cut rates thinking they've tamed inflation when the real surge is just building under the surface. That mistake leads to higher, longer-term inflation, which destabilizes everything. It puts their credibility on the line. And that credibility is everything because market stability hinges on the central bank being predictable. Without those gold standard reports, that entire chain of confidence, it just breaks down.
And that breakdown, it must hit the traders and the investment community immediately. They can't just hit pause and wait for Washington to figure things out. They've got to make moves.
Absolutely. Global finance operates in milliseconds. The moment official data is delayed, that gap, that vacuum, immediately becomes a risk factor that has to be priced in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When that gold standard government data goes dark, what do traders and analysts actually do? What are the specific substitutes they start using when the BLS reports are gone?
They scramble. They really scramble for proxies because they can't stop, right? You have to generate returns. So they shift their reliance completely to the private sector. The sources are varied, but generally they fall into these high-frequency, unweighted data sets.
Give us some examples, like what are they actually reading instead of the official reports?
Okay, so you'll see analysts poring over aggregated credit card spending data, often licensed from payment processors. They're trying to gauge real-time consumption. They start relying heavily on reports from private payroll companies, like ADP, to get a sense of job creation. You even see hedge funds buying access to satellite imagery and foot traffic data at mall parking lots, just to estimate retail sales before the government can.
So private industry steps in to fill the void, and often they're providing this info faster than the government ever could. I mean, from a speed perspective, that sounds like a huge plus. But you mentioned there's a serious risk here. What are the methodological limitations that stop this private data from being a true substitute?
Well, the primary limitation is representativeness. That and a total lack of rigorous statistical weighting. See, government agencies like the BLS use these incredibly complex weighted sampling methods. They're designed specifically to represent the entire U.S. population, across demographics, geographies, income levels, everything. They have processes for seasonal adjustments, benchmark revision.
And private data doesn't have that?
Not even close. Private sources are fast, sure, but they are almost always unweighted and inherently biased. For instance, credit card data often overrepresents higher-income consumers. A report from a major payroll processor, while it captures millions of workers, it will inevitably exclude the self-employed, contractors, workers at the smallest businesses. All the groups the official BLS survey is designed to capture. They only give you a partial view.
So the traders get speed, but what they're seeing is the economy through a distorted lens. It's magnifying the view of certain sectors while leaving others completely invisible.
That is the perfect way to put it. The analogy from the source material is powerful here. It says relying on private data is like trying to draw a map of the world based on seeing only one street, unquote. You might know exactly what spending habits on Wall Street look like, but you have no clue about consumption in rural Iowa or employment in services versus manufacturing. When billion-dollar investment decisions are forced to rely on those narrow street views, the chance for a huge aggregate error, it becomes massive.
Wait, if that's true, why doesn't the government just buy that faster private data? Why not just integrate it into their reports to speed things up?
That's a critical question, and the separation exists for a reason. Incorporating that unweighted private data would pollute the scientific rigor of the official stats. The BLS maintains its integrity by relying on its own established, monitored survey techniques, its independent weighting. They need to produce the actual authoritative facts, not some, amalgamation of models. The private data offers a temporary peak for a trading desk, but it totally undermines the ability of policymakers to really grasp the big picture.
Okay, let's move to what might be the most troubling part of this, the permanent damage, the idea of tainted data. What happens when the delayed official reports finally do come out? Why is the market so skeptical?
The market reaction is almost always skepticism. That's where the term tainted data comes from. The problem is in the collection mechanism. Traders, analysts, they know the numbers that finally come out are no longer based purely on observed facts.
I think most people assume that when the government reopens, they just flip a switch and go collect the numbers they missed. But that's not how these sophisticated surveys work, is it?
Not at all. Data collection for, say, the monthly job survey is highly calendar-driven.
Oh.
The agencies operate on specific survey weeks, fixed cycles. When they shut down, they miss those windows completely. The raw data that would have been collected, the actual interviews, the payroll confirmations, it just ceases to exist. There's a literal hole in the time series.
A permanent, unrecoverable data gap. So when the agencies restart, how do they fill that hole? They can't just leave a blank space in the official record.
Right, they can't. So they have to resort to these sophisticated techniques, primarily something called statistical imputation. This is where the term educated guesswork starts to become, relevant. Imputation means statisticians use complex models, using past trends and the data points from right before and after the shutdown to estimate what the missing data should have been.
That immediately sounds like it compromises the integrity of the number, especially if the economy changed abruptly right around the shutdown, a nonlinear event that models can't predict.
That is the core vulnerability.
Yeah.
Exactly. If the economy was shifting dramatically during that shutdown, say a sudden hiring slowdown, the imputation models, which rely on linear trends, might fail to capture that shock. So the final number they release is no longer a pure measurement of reality. It's a measurement blended with an estimation based on assumptions.
And the market, which is full of people whose entire job is to spot statistical weirdness, is acutely aware that this is happening.
Absolutely. Knowing that a key metric like the unemployment rate is based on an imputed model, it instantly breeds skepticism. Portfolio managers know they are relying partly on an estimate to make billion-dollar decisions, and that fundamentally changes how they price risk.
So what's the actual quantifiable effect of that skepticism? Does volatility just spike?
It leads to much greater volatility than normal, yeah, especially in high-frequency trading. When a clean, unpainted jobs report comes out, the market might have a measured reaction, a 10 basis point swing in Treasury yields, say. But if that same report is known to be tainted with imputation, uncertainty explodes. You could see double or triple that swing because the level of conviction in the number is so low. The delayed data, even when it's finally released, is just treated as less reliable, and that prolongs instability.
This sounds like a cascading crisis. It extends far beyond the political fight itself. First, the delay causes policy mistakes. Second, relying on private proxies creates a distorted view. And third, even when the official data comes back, it's damaged, fueling even more volatility.
It is a profound failure to maintain the critical financial infrastructure of the country at every level. The cost isn't just measured in delayed paychecks for federal workers. It's measured in systemic market instability and increased policy error risk that affects every single American investor.
So that brings us to the biggest question. What can be done? What action is necessary to safeguard the integrity of U.S. economic data from future shutdowns?
The recommendation from every economist and market analyst is clear, and it has to come from Congress or the White House. They have to formally designate the collection and production of these key economic indicators as essential activities, meaning the jobs report, GDP, and CPI. They continue regardless of political gridlock.
So you treat the statisticians at the BLS and the BEA like emergency first responders, like air traffic controllers or the Border Patrol, because their work is continuous and non-negotiable for national stability.
That is precisely the argument. The source material is very strong on this point. Agencies like the BLS and BEA provide the financial infrastructure of the entire country. The perceived savings from shutting them down for a few weeks are just. They're dwarfed by the massive cost of compromising data integrity. Protecting the economy requires protecting the source of the facts used to run it. Certainty starts with protecting the people who produce those facts.
So what does this all mean?
It means that policy stability, market function, and the trust placed in the entire U.S. economy. It relies completely on having trustworthy, untainted economic data on time. The absence of these reports isn't just a political hiccup. It creates real, measurable, systemic damage. It forces the hands of central banks and costs investors certainty. For a functioning global economy, politics simply has to yield to technical necessity. You have to maintain the infrastructure of fact production.
So the next time a political battle causes a government stoppage, you, the listener, should consider this. If the fundamental facts we use to guide policy, the jobs report, inflation numbers are compromised, if they rely on statistical imputation, what does that imply about the structural stability of our future economic cycles? Is educated guesswork becoming the new normal in periods of political deadlock? And what price do we eventually pay for that? That's a deep dive we encourage you to explore further.